Today we're going to be talking about accessibility. Many gamers may struggle with a disability that can prevent them from playing games like everybody else. In an article on accessibility.com by Cam Waller called The State of Accessibility in Gaming in 2022, out of 2.8 billion gamers worldwide, 20% of them suffer from some form of a disability. That's around 560 million people. So as you can tell, there's a large audience of people that would need accessibility features in their games. Let's see what the industry has done about it. Microsoft has been a big player in pushing for more accessibility with the introduction of the Xbox Adaptive Controller. Released in 2018, this controller was designed to help people with motor disabilities. Microsoft consulted Able Gamers, an organization that's helped fund and support disabled gamers for over 20 years. The only downside would be the pricing of the controller, which is priced at £75 or $100. In comparison, a standard Xbox controller can be bought for $60 officially, or unofficially can be bought for $30.
I got mine for a clean 30.
It's not official, but it works just as well. I get that this isn't exactly relevant to accessibility, but I think it's worth a mention at least. Sony is also planning to fire back with Project Leonardo, their own accessible controller for the PlayStation 5. As of now, the controller is yet to be released, but you can read more about it in an article on the PlayStation blog written by Senior Vice President Hideaki Nishina. One of the biggest steps forward for accessibility was in 2020 when they gave out their first award for innovation in accessibility. The winner of this award was The Last of Us Part 2 for including over 60 accessibility features. Not only would the award encourage developers to take accessibility more seriously, but by setting the standards so high, it encourages developers to put that much more effort into their accessibility features in comparison to before. While nowadays accessibility has been given a lot more respect and attention, it took a long time to get this far, and it was because of the community themselves that we were able to get to this point. I'd previously mentioned Able Gamers, but now I'd like to explain more what they've done for the community. Able Gamers was founded in 2004 by Mark Bartlett. After Mark's best friend was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and after he sustained an injury of his own during his time in the military, his eyes were open to the problems that disabled people face on a day-to-day basis, and how gaming can help them cope with that. So he set out to make gaming a more accessible pastime for more people. In their 20 years of service, they've given over $400,000 to provide disabled people with equipment and donated thousands of hours of direct service to support them. They've also worked in the industry alongside big companies like PlayStation, Xbox, Blizzard, and Activision. So they've helped these companies to provide accessibility features for games like Call of Duty and Overwatch, and also had a big say in the design of the Xbox Accessibility Controller. More information on Able Gamers and their founder can be found on ablegamers.org. I'd also like to highlight caniplaythat.com, a website that hosts several news stories regarding accessibility in gaming. What's most important about them though is their game reviews. They review several games and judge them based on how accessible they are. An example of one of the reviews was the Resident Evil 2 remake released in 2019, reviewed by a deaf gamer. They said it was a complete failure in accessibility due to the game's reliance on audio and no inclusion of any audio visualization. It sounds a bit harsh, but it's fair considering what they're reviewing it for. Another great community resource is a playlist of videos by Game Maker's Toolkit. The playlist includes a series called Designing for Disability, in which Mark Brown explains ways to design games to make them more accessible for people with certain disabilities. Following that is 3 yearly videos from 2019 to 2021 where he goes over the biggest games of those years and reviews them based on how accessible they were. In the videos they noted that progressively with every year, accessibility was improving. They did unfortunately note that Japan was lagging behind, but an article on Can I Play That by Marin explained that the Gaming Accessibility Association of Japan was announced in April 2024, so that could change very soon. I think these are all good examples of how the community has contributed to better accessibility, both in the AAA gaming industry and in the indie gaming industry as well. Able Gamers has directly contributed to the AAA industry and had them take accessibility much more seriously. Can I Play That is an invaluable resource for people to know what games they can and cannot play based on the disabilities that they have. And Game Maker's Toolkit's videos are good for helping the general audience understand accessibility and to help indies to understand how they can make their games more accessible, since they're the kind of audience that would be more likely to see his videos. And as of recording, Game Maker's Toolkit has 1.57 million subscribers, so he'd have the biggest audience. Now I'd like to argue why we should encourage more games to add accessibility features. I said in the beginning that approximately 560 million people would need accessibility features, so there's already that financial incentive, but there's also the personal incentive that some people would really need these to experience gaming and feel some sense of belonging. In a talk on Nordic Game Jam from Arevia, a Twitch streamer, she talks about how she had to grow up with a condition called cerebral palsy. This condition prevented her from being able to keep up and learn like other kids, but when she discovered gaming, it allowed her to feel some sense of empowerment and belonging. She also remarks on the frustration of having dyslexia, which is another condition that she suffered from, and gaming became even more of a major support for her when games actually read out the text for you and had accessibility features that could help with her other disabilities as well. Because of gaming, Arevia was able to create her own community on Twitch to help support the disabled community, and further on in her talk, she features comments from her community talking about how they would like more accessibility features in their games. There's also a video by Frogwater called What I Learned About Accessibility and Difficulty in Games. While he himself is not disabled, he talks about how his brother suffers from a condition called Kabuki syndrome. His reaction time is slower and it takes him longer to learn things. This was heartbreaking for his older brother because it meant he couldn't share video games with him like he initially wanted to. But thanks to games like Dusk including accessibility features, it allowed his brother to experience games with him on the same level. Thanks to this, his little brother could experience games at the same level as him, and he could share his hobby like he always wanted to. My second argument for why we should include more accessibility features is the curb cut effect. It's explained in great detail on a video on the Extra History channel, but to summarize, the curb cut effect means that by making accessibility features for the people who need it most, they can benefit everybody. Lethal Company's arachnophobia mode is great for people who have arachnophobia, but also people who hate spiders. Subtitles are a very popular feature, and they can help people who have hearing issues or people listening to background noise as well. And the ability to turn off QuickTime events is great for everybody because nobody likes QuickTime events. Now for some arguments against accessibility, I'd say the first one we could consider is cost. This doesn't apply to AAA companies since they're rich enough to afford a lot of this stuff, but indies may struggle to find playtesters and resources to make their games more accessible. However, it's definitely still possible. In designing for disability, they actually recommended several accessibility tools that can be used to make their games more accessible, like certain fonts, websites to check color blindness filters, and a lot of other resources that would be very useful. So I don't think cost is really that big of an argument that can be used here, especially since the resources I mentioned were free. The biggest argument here is that accessibility features can change the game in ways that go against the intended vision of the developer. Celeste presents you with a disclaimer before turning on their assist mode that it goes against the intended vision that they had for the game. And I previously mentioned Resident Evil 2 and how it relies on audio for its game design. But using audio isn't exclusive to Resident Evil 2's game design. A lot of horror games rely on audio in order to catch the player off guard or signify where enemies could be. They're not designed to have audio visualization, so adding it could break the intended experience or mitigate the horror of the game. I think one of the best examples of this would be Dark Souls. This game, along with all of From Software's games, are really well known for their extreme difficulty, and it sparked a big debate amongst the gaming community about whether Dark Souls games should include an easy mode or not. There's another video by Game Maker's Toolkit that very well summarizes the debate. It also includes a quote from the lead designer, Hidetaka Miyazaki. He says, "Ever since Demon's Souls, I've really been pursuing making games that give players a sense of accomplishment by overcoming tremendous odds. So a lower difficulty would go against the intended vision, which is why the series has been so adamant on never including one. Along with that, it's generally unfair for designers to have to compromise their decisions just for the audience. However, it can be a bit unfair that people with disabilities aren't able to experience Dark Souls, and as I mentioned with Celeste before, developers can explain their intended vision, but still allow people to use more accessibility options if they really need them. Personally, I think developers should strive to include more accessibility options, but I can understand that not every single developer would want to. There are plenty of games that already include more accessibility features, and it's only growing from here. So it's not exactly necessary for every single game to be accessible now. As the years go by and with more feedback from players, developers will make their games more accessible. It'll only get better with every year.